Welcome everyone to our Fallbrook Climate Action Team meeting. Tonight, we are pleased to have Meghan Kelly and Ariel Hamburger from the San Diego Department of Planning and Development Services. And they will talk about updates to the draft of the San Diego County Climate Action Plan, also known as CAP. The CAP provides measures on ways to reduce carbon emissions in the unincorporated areas of San Diego County and has a goal of a net zero in 2045. For those of you who are new to our meeting, we are a group of local activists who do monthly presentations on ways to reduce your carbon footprint and mitigate it. If you have missed any of our presentations, you can watch them on our website, fallbrookclimateactionteam.org, or on YouTube. Before we begin, also, if you'd like to help us in any way, please leave your name and number in the chat, and we will get back to you. Also, before we begin, the audio on your computers will be mute. So if you have questions about the presentation that you would like to ask the presenters, please put them in the chat and they will answer them when they are done. Joy, did you want to talk about next month's presentation?
Yes, next month we've invited someone to speak about Power San Diego, which is an effort to fire SDG&E in the city of San Diego. In other words, they're going to try to put a proposition or an initiative on the ballot, on the November ballot, by gathering signatures to buy up all of the grid or all of the infrastructure, the lines, the transmission lines that SDG&E has in San Diego, and have it be a municipal utility. So that should be interesting.
Okay, thank you, Joy. Well, I guess we're ready to begin. So Meghan and Ariel, take it away.
Thank you so much. Give me a moment here while I share my screen. Folks can see that okay?
Yes.
Great. Well, like Deanna said, my name is Ariel Hamburger. I'm a senior planner with the County of San Diego Sustainability Planning Division, and joining me is Meghan Kelly, project manager for the Climate Action Plan. We have been working together and since late 2020 on updating the Climate Action Plan, and we just closed out a public review of the draft cap in early January 2024. So we're here tonight to share details on the draft cap, answer any of the questions that you might have on the process to update the county's cap. On this slide, we have we have a simple agenda for what we plan to present tonight. So we'll provide some context about the Climate Action Plan, or as we refer to it as the CAP, a quick overview of what's included in the draft CAP, and then we'll dive a bit deeper into our CAP measures and end with a discussion on what's to come next. Like Deanna said, we ask that you put any questions into the chat, and we'll reserve time at the end to respond. First, we want to provide a bit more info on what the CAP is for those who aren't already familiar. The CAP is a multi-objective plan that balances environmental, economic, and community interests and aligns with multiple county initiatives to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But the CAP update isn't just about addressing climate change, it's also about the quality of life. It's about people and communities, and the actions in the CAP have the potential to improve our lives, such as planting more trees, making it easier and safer to walk, and reducing the waste that ends up in our landfills. The county's CAP covers the land the county has their jurisdiction over. This includes the areas on the map in the green, which reflect the unincorporated communities such as Fallbrook, and the red dots, which represent each of the county-owned or operated facilities. This does not include the various federal, state, and tribal lands located within the green on the map, in which case about 35%, or a little over 800,000 acres, are under the county's land use jurisdiction spanning across 23 community planning areas and represented by 28 community planning and sponsor groups, as labeled here in white. As previously mentioned, the intent of the CAP is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions being produced in the unincorporated communities and county facilities shown on the previous slide's map to address climate change. This graph shows where we anticipate emissions will come from through 2045. The major sources of emissions through 2045 are projected to be from on-road transportation and natural gas. On this graph, you can also see the county greenhouse gas reduction targets to show how through CAP implementation, we will meet and exceed state targets through the implementation of the CAP measures, which we will go over in the next few slides. Important to note on this slide, the draft CAP will meet the county's targets of reducing emissions by 43.6% below 2019 levels by 2030 and 85.4% below 2019 levels by 2045. Now that we've established the what, the where, and why, we want to share more about the how. The CAP establishes 5 sectors, 9 strategies, 21 measures, and 70 actions that the county will take to achieve the 2030 and 2045 targets and an aspirational goal of achieving net zero emissions by 2045, which means we're removing as many emissions as we're producing. These actions reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the 5 emission reduction sectors, which are based on where we anticipate emissions will come from, as shown on the previous slide. This includes built environment and transportation, energy, solid waste, water and wastewater, and agriculture and conservation. For each of these measures, we've included emissions reduction potential, implementing actions, path to net zero actions, equity-based outcomes, and co-benefits, all of which we'll discuss more in a few slides. Next, I'll go over each of the measures within each sector in more detail. The first sector is built environment and transportation, which includes 2 strategies, 6 measures, and 12 actions that result in the greenhouse gas emission reductions shown on this slide. Measures in this sector include to reduce fleet and small equipment emissions in county operations, increase the use of low carbon and zero emission landscaping and off-road construction equipment in the unincorporated area, install electric vehicle charging stations and provide incentives for zero emission vehicles in the unincorporated area, reduce emissions from county employee commutes, improve county roadways to encourage walking, biking, and rolling to and from transit and destinations and increase transportation efficiency, and lastly, support transit and transportation demand management to reduce single occupancy vehicle trips in the unincorporated area. The next sector is the energy sector, which includes 1 strategy, 3 measures, and 6 actions. The measures in this sector include develop policies and programs to increase energy efficiency, renewable energy use, and electrification in county operations, develop policies and programs to increase energy efficiency and electrification in the unincorporated area, and lastly, develop policies and programs to increase renewable energy use, generation, and storage in the unincorporated area. The next sector is the solid waste sector, which includes 2 strategies, 4 measures, and 4 actions. Measures in this sector include achieve zero waste in county operations, achieve zero waste within the unincorporated area, improve waste management practices at county-owned solid waste facilities to reduce emissions, and improve waste management practices in the unincorporated areas to reduce emissions and increase waste diversion. The next sector is water and wastewater sector, which includes 2 strategies, 3 measures, and 7 actions. The measures in the water and wastewater sector include develop policies and programs to increase water efficiency, retention, recycling, and reuse to reduce potable water consumption in county operations, develop policies and programs to increase indoor and outdoor water conservation, including water efficiency, retention, recycling, and reuse in new and existing development in the unincorporated area, and develop programs to increase stormwater and wastewater treatment efficiency to reduce imported potable water use in the unincorporated area. Our 5th and final sector is the agriculture and conservation sector, which includes 2 strategies, 5 measures, and 7 actions. The measures in this sector include acquire and manage conservation lands to preserve natural lands and maximize carbon storage potential in the unincorporated area, develop a tree planting program that expands canopy across the unincorporated area and prioritizes underserved communities, preserve agricultural lands to prioritize carbon storage and balance economic and development goals, incentivize carbon farming to expand carbon storage capacity on agricultural land and support climate-friendly farming practices in the unincorporated area, and finally, reduce greenhouse gas emissions from agricultural operations. For each of the measures shown on the previous slides, the draft cap will contain the information on these points shown here to describe how the county will implement the measure and what their expected outcomes are. These include a timeline and associated implementation goals between 2030 to 2045, greenhouse gas reductions that we can achieve along that same timeline, the implementation costs for each measure, as well as funding sources and opportunities, which county department is responsible for implementing the measure, equity considerations to guide how the measures can be implemented to achieve equitable outcomes in our communities, and a display of how each measure impacts different co-benefits. The reason we're emphasizing co-benefits is because much of the feedback that we have received over the last couple of years is related to co-benefits, or the additional beneficial outcomes that could be achieved through CAP implementation. This includes things like improved public health outcomes and air quality, reduced utility bills, and increased access to open space and active transportation opportunities, just to name a few. In addition to the draft CAP document, where you can find the details about the CAP measures, there are also 8 appendices that support the information included. Those 8 appendices are listed on the slide here and include Community Outreach and Engagement Appendix, Co-Benefits and Evaluation Tool information, the Greenhouse Gas Emission Inventory and Projections for the unincorporated community, and also for local government, which goes into more detail about how emissions levels were established, Greenhouse Gas Reduction Target and Gap Analysis, which also has a technical memorandum that showcases our work for how our targets were established, existing and future carbon stock estimates, combined measure workbook, and the CAP consistency checklist. Now that we've closed out public review of the draft CAP, we're working to finalize draft implementation appendices that will also be available ahead of CAP adoption. These include an equity framework and cost analyses, which will help guide implementation of CAP measures. We recognize that centering social equity and justice in our efforts is important, and to that end, we're developing an equity framework to serve as a guidance for the implementation of equitable climate actions outlined in the draft CAP. The framework we develop will identify best practices in implementing and assessing fair and inclusive climate actions, programs, and outcomes, and prioritizing communities with the greatest need. For example, when we consider equitable implementation in tree planting, it means that we're proactively planning to plant trees in areas that need more tree canopy coverage based on existing limited tree canopy or where heat impacts are the greatest. The cost analysis piece refers to a technical analysis that determines the cost of establishing, growing, and running programs and policies. The technical analysis is broken up into 3 categories. A CAP implementation cost report, which determines the cost to establish and run programs, how to monitor and report on progress, and identification of funding sources, and assessing possible funding gaps. A CAP cost effectiveness analysis based on the number of greenhouse gas emissions reduced, and lastly, a cost to disproportionately impacted communities, which will identify costs, benefits, and resources associated with implementing CAP measures. Like I mentioned, those 2 appendices will be key to evaluating the real cost of implementation, proactively eliminating disproportionate burdens, and creating pathways for equitable implementation. The CAP is also accompanied by a supplemental environmental impact report, or supplemental EIR. The supplemental EIR evaluates the environmental impacts of the proposed CAP measures and expands on the previous environmental analysis included in the county's 2011 General Plan, programmatic EIR. It includes an overview of the Climate Action Plan, in-depth studies of potential impacts, measures to reduce or avoid those impacts, and maps and technical details of the project area. It also includes project alternatives that would reduce significant impacts from implementing the CAP measures while still meeting the objectives of the CAP. Alternatives may include policy changes or various changes to CAP measures that achieve the greenhouse gas emission targets. It also includes smart growth alternatives, which aim to reduce vehicle miles traveled beyond what the CAP measures do themselves through strategies that include compact, efficient, and environmentally friendly design development and/or development that is close to job centers, services, and amenities, or includes mobility infrastructure. Like I said before, we just concluded our formal public review period for the draft CAP, and now we're in the process of reviewing and analyzing all the wonderful feedback we received to see how to integrate it into the CAP. The next major milestone will be the release of our implementation appendices, which will happen ahead of CAP adoption. We anticipate bringing a final CAP to the Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors later in the year for their adoption of the plan. Here on the slide are some ways to stay involved in our process and share your feedback. We invite everyone to contact us with questions, request a meeting, or to provide input. And on the next slide, I also have mine and Megan's direct email contact if you prefer to ask questions that way. All right. So
That was pretty quick.
Great.
Okay, I guess it's time for questions. Are you done?
Yeah,
Okay.
I can start with the questions that you shared, Deanna.
Okay.
So the first question that you shared was asking about our plan for implementation of green energy renewables, such as solar, hydropower, ocean, wind, geothermal, et cetera. And I will say that the climate action plan is going to continue to support and expand on our successful measure of supporting distributed rooftop solar power. So that's really the renewable energy that we're emphasizing in the CAP, although we're also looking at wind, and we've heard quite a bit from stakeholders about their interest in geothermal. So that will be something else that we'll be exploring through the CAP as well. But in terms of details of the where and the when, those are to be determined after CAP adoption. And then I know you also had a question about carbon storage and any research or data on how effective this is. So there's a couple different ways that we could answer this question because in terms of what you're asking when it relates to carbon storage. So of course, there's some work being done at the state and federal level around carbon capture and storage, and we'll continue to follow those closely to see if there's any technologies we would want to deploy locally. But as far as some of the carbon storage and carbon sequestration measures that are included in the CAP, such as those related to tree planting and our carbon farming program, or what we're renaming as our climate smart land stewardship program, there is well-established scientific data to support these as a means of, increasing the amount of carbon that our natural and working lands can sequester. So in short, yes, to your question. And then I know you also had a question about some things that have changed since we last updated the climate action plan in 2018. And we're really building on the success of measures. So not a lot of people realize that we didn't stop implementing the 2018 CAP, and we actually saw a significant reduction in greenhouse gas emissions exceeding our 2020 target by 22%. So we're continuing to really support those measures like the streamlined permitting of solar panels to build upon those successes, but also expanding on them. And I would say some of the really neat things about this new draft CAP is that we have a net zero emissions goal. We are not relying on the purchase of carbon offsets at all, and we're really emphasizing equity and environmental justice quite a bit more, based off of interest from stakeholders and our board. And then I know you shared a question about charging stations for electric vehicles and plans for the energy sector. So you saw charging stations for electric vehicles are called out as an action in the draft cap. And the county has really continued the progress that we made with the 2018 cap and our charging station goal there. We also have since adopted an electric vehicle roadmap, which further refined our charging goal and where we want to implement infrastructure based on where it would be most utilized in the unincorporated area. And based off of all of that information, we've actually been pretty successful in getting some grants to install chargers at our facilities, and we'll continue to pursue state and federal opportunities to install more chargers at our public facilities as well as on private properties. And as for the energy sector, so the county has drafted a zero carbon portfolio plan, which looks at how we can transition all of our county facilities to zero carbon. And our team is also working on an energy equity and resiliency report, which will help us kind of figure out what we need to do to make the grid and the community more reliable and resilient as we move to more electrification of everything, right? From our cars to our homes. And then I know there was one other question that you had shared about new developments in green energy or anything related to red kelp, that sort of thing. Unfortunately, we because we're unincorporated focused, we do not have anything in blue carbon or I should say just related to the coastal opportunities, but something that we've also really bolstered in this cap is what our ag community can do and how they can participate in supporting greenhouse gas emission reductions. So we're looking to build out the program that I mentioned before, the Climate Smart Land Stewardship Program, that would incentivize voluntary application of different carbon farming practices that have been proven to increase carbon sequestration. And I'm actually going to stop sharing so I can see everybody's faces better. But if you want me to re-pull up the slide so to address anything, I'm happy to do so. I know there are some questions in the chat as well. All right. So I'll start with a question about how many of the measures listed are already underway.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, that was my question, and you actually addressed that a moment ago. So I'd like to change it because the obvious thing is like, why wait on any of these things? So what items specifically do need to wait? Is there anything in this in the CAP plan as it's drafted right now that needs to wait for approval?
That's a great question, Cynthia. I think, you know, it's so in August of 2022, that's correct, right, Megan? I'm trying to remember the 831. We had listed out a few actions that we thought were really important to kind of make progress on ahead of CAP adoption so that once the CAP is adopted and some funds are appropriated, we can hit the ground running with those. I've mentioned a few of them this evening. One is our energy equity resiliency report, which will help us figure out how we can make our grid more reliable, help us figure out how we can transition to more electrification in our lives, right? And so we needed a study underway to just even understand the landscape of like, how many homes are we talking about and what are the grids that they're relying on, all of that information to be able to make those changes. We also included in there the development of our Climate Smart Land Stewardship Program. So we've been working on that over the last year and a half, talking with the Farm Bureau, with other ag producers in the area to better understand how they would like this program to be developed, what sort of incentives they're interested in, what practices they're already doing, all of those good things. We also included a hydrogen report, so really trying to understand how we can support maybe medium and heavy duty vehicles that may be electric and batteries associated with electric are out of the question for them, but there are other ways of other fuel sources such as hydrogen, clean hydrogen, and studying the possibility of that. And then I'm missing, what am I missing, Megan?
There were two related to energy, but you covered them in your description.
Yeah. So all that to say is that we haven't been waiting, right? We've been kind of like doing our due diligence to get ourselves prepared to be able to implement programs and get things up and running once we have approvals and once we have funds available to us.
Thank
We've
you.
also been pursuing grant opportunities related to those as well.
That's encouraging. Well, sounds like you're waiting for some research and study results, and then more will take place.
Exactly. I see Mike has his hand raised. So, and I see there's a number of questions in the chat. So Mike, if you would like to ask.
Yeah, thank you. I wonder why you didn't implement the most important mitigation measures that are in the CARB scoping plan, since that is an official state plan to achieve our official 2030 mandate. And it has been established going back to the 2011 letter from Attorney General Harris and follow on subsequent court rulings that she was right. You are not allowed to ignore them. And ignore them doesn't mean you're going to talk about them a lot. I noticed that you did talk about the scoping plan, and you did talk about SB 32, but you are ignoring it in this sense. At this point in time, 2030 is so soon. That is our climate stabilization requirement year. If humanity fails that and does what the county's doing, ignoring the official plan, we will not avoid destabilization. And we will go into that, and it will. You don't explain that at all in your background, but so at this point, what you have to do to not ignore is to embrace and adopt the mitigation measures that are applicable. Downtown, you have extremely expensive car parking, and it's absolutely absurd that the county gives its employees free
ask a
parking.
question.
Yeah, do you recognize? Do you agree with any of what I said? Do you recognize the scoping plan that you have to implement?
I'm not got her on.
What's that?
I'm in my pajamas. So I'm working.
I'm muted, John, so it doesn't interrupt. But get with the question, please, Mike.
Well, let me be as concise as possible. The scoping plan says that you're supposed to price parking, and you, in your climate action plan, don't do that. And that's ignoring the scoping plan. So do you have any regrets about that, or why is it that the county absolutely believes in free parking, even when you're downtown where parking is extremely expensive? And so if you give them free parking, the problem is you're not benefiting the employees that don't drive. They're just as good as the other employees. Whether they drive, they don't drive, they should get the exact same benefit.
Okay,
We
let's
use money.
give
We use money to do that. So I just wonder what
Mike, let's give him a chance to answer.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks. I'll jump in just because I have read your comments thoroughly, Mike, and have reviewed them from the beginning, even as we were implementing the 2018 cap. I'll say, we do have a measure to reduce emissions from county employee commutes. The employee price parking was something we have been and continue to look at critically to see where and how we could implement that at our facilities. But the fact of the matter is that the county has changed its approach to teleworking since COVID. We're currently in the process of consolidating offices, repurposing some of our facilities to increase housing in the communities that need it. And the result is that, you know, our team drives to the office or commutes to the office 1 day a week. So it's really thrown off the equation of what that price point would be to incentivize people to, you know, spend an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours using transit to commute to work versus just paying
Wow.
for that 1 day. And that's something we continue to work at. We have been coordinating with other similar jurisdictions that serve, you know, an
But what about the
unincorporated
county?
area.
What about the county employees that clean the restrooms? Do they do that from home also? Or I would think that if you're going to do maintenance there, all kinds of that kind of work, you're going to have to go there every single day.
Okay,
And
I'll
when
just
I
finish.
see parking down there, I see it's really, really expensive. And if these people
Let's
can't
let
afford to
her-
have a car,
Mike, just let her finish.
why do you mistreat those people?
Yeah, I'll just finish my response because you do have some great points and we do continue to look at those, especially as we're in this important phase of the project where we're reviewing public comments that we've received and are responding to those in our revised documents. As I was saying, we have been coordinating with other jurisdictions with, you know, a similar footprint of ours that serve, you know, less urban populations and have a workforce that is similar to ours as well to see, you know, what they've included, what they have done and what's worked and what hasn't. We've also been in contact with CARB to talk about, you know, alignment with the scoping plan and how we can achieve that through our climate action plan. So we are, you know, actively working behind the scenes to address these comments and these concerns. And we are, you know, as Ariel mentioned, making those balances between all of the different priorities that we see and reaching our targets and reaching targets that are in alignment with the scoping plan for 2030, which is beyond, you know, state targets to put us on that path to 2045.
Every time I send anything to you, I beg you to call me or to email me or let me know what you're thinking or talk to the CEO of Ace Parking. I mean, you were wondering how to do it. Ace Parking is willing to do it. Now, it's never been done before. If your criteria is where has this been done before, we're not going to get anywhere. And 2030 is very soon. And it's very unjust. Besides, it is the most important category of the mitigation measures that CARB is talking about. Pricing parking, pricing road use, and doubling transit, which you can't do. You can't do the road use, although the county supervisors did everything they can to put that down, but that's not your responsibility. That's our responsibility as, you know, politically active people. And those are the people we elect, people that demagogue road use charge and probably they would do the same thing with parking. I don't know, but it's clear that price parking is extremely important and it's something you can do. So there's 3 things that are important to them. You can't do one of them. You can do. And
Okay,
so,
Mike,
and that goes back 10 years.
Mike,
This
we got your
discussion has
point.
been going on 10 years.
Let me see what John Watson has to say.
Tom, before we do that, do you
Thank
mind if we answer some of the questions in the chat that
Yes,
came through
go
before
ahead.
John raised his hand? Okay, great.
Go ahead. Go
So
ahead.
I'll kind of group them by who asked them too. So I see that Bill and Pam asked about permitting processes for new wind installation. And yes, we're looking at streamlining permitting for all renewable energy, so both wind and solar. And then you asked also about assistance in electrification of school buses, and that's also a measure or an action in the CAP is to assist with electrification of school buses in the unincorporated area. And then I see Mark has a question about, is the CAP for the county government or for all the people of the county? So the CAP pertains to county facilities that we own and operate, and then where the county has land use jurisdiction, which is the unincorporated communities of the county. So kind of can be confusing because a lot of those county facilities are not in the unincorporated communities, but some are, but that's what the CAP pertains to. And then happy to take John's question. Thank you.
Question,
Go ahead,
first of all, like the group on their detailed breakdown of the climate problem into some very small detail. But while you had gone through the procedure of identifying that work structure, did you in parallel determine what disciplinary actions would have to be entailed in terms of enforcement, regulation, and ordinance? As you're going along, were you able to establish kind of a discipline structure in parallel to all of the actions you had to take?
Okay, I think I don't know if you saw all of our faces, but you were kind of breaking up there, but I think I understood what you said, which is like kind of what's the avenue for each of these measures. And we do have in chapter 5 of the CAP is our implementation chapter, and it does lay out for each of the actions, whether it's an incentive, an initiative, or a requirement. So that's the level of detail that we have there. Was that your question, John? I'll take silence as a yes.
You got muted there. Go
Okay,
ahead.
I got. Yes, that is the nature of my question. And it's a good thing that you are doing that. I think there's going to be law enforcement involved in some cases, and you need to be ready for that because time is short. 2030 is very far away.
Thank you, John.
So,
Yeah.
thanks.
Yeah. And I'll put in the chat a link to our engagement portal, which is the easiest way to download a copy of the CAP. And you all are welcome to, of course, take your time, review. And if you have additional questions, I'll also put our emails in the chat since I know we don't have that slide up anymore.
I had a question. You had, one of your strategies was zero waste at county operated waste management waste facilities. How is that going?
It's a process. So I think there were two things there. Yeah, we have a zero waste goal for all of our county facilities. And then we also are looking at how we can improve processes or functions of our county owned landfills, which we recognize they're closed, but there still are opportunities to, continue to improve upon how they're managed. So. But yeah, it's a work in progress, and you can imagine how COVID shook a lot of things up, right? For a lot of these measures. So.
Well, the zero waste thing, it's important, but it's one of the harder ones. I know Mike was talking about the transportation thing, which is something that we're all concerned about, but zero waste tends to fall down in the bottom of the list a lot, but it's really important, but it's very difficult too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are all trying our best to reduce and reuse and recycle, and then hopefully compost as well. But I saw Megan, you came off mute. If there's anything you want to add there.
Yeah, just to call out, zero waste, which this group is probably well aware of. We're calling it in the industry speak, that's 90% waste diversion. So we're diverting 90% of our materials from going to a landfill. It's a big task for us for the county government, but that's something we've committed to in the draft cap. And we've also committed to that in the unincorporated area ahead of when the state has. But that's something that we kind of tried to do across the board is with all of the different strategies. So whether it's zero waste or electrifying buildings and facilities, having a shorter time frame for the county, because of course we have more control over how we operate our facilities and do our operations. But it also helps us to, ground truth some methods and figure out how to implement these things with our own work, and then implement that through the unincorporated area. So just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah, and then that gives you the opportunity, if you were to succeed, and the other jurisdictions push back on you could show that you're doing it, or you're doing it in your own area when other people complain it's hard to do. If you
Exactly.
succeed.
Yeah.
Good. I like it. Joy?
Yeah, I think one of the thorniest issues that I see in our area, in the unincorporated area, are two things, and they're linked, and they're also linked to equity. Renters who pay high utility bills and don't have the advantage of solar because there's no incentives for landlords to put solar on rental houses or apartment buildings, and lack of charging stations for people, especially who live in older apartment buildings where there's no way you can put charging stations in there for all those people. And most of them drive older ICE vehicles that are putting a lot of GHG in the atmosphere, and they have to drive to work every day. And because there's no transit. So all of these things are connected.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something, so I mentioned the equity framework. That's definitely something that's come up quite a bit as we develop that framework, is how we make sure that any incentives or changes that we're encouraging homeowners to make, those benefits don't just end there, but also extend to the people that are potentially renting those homes, right? So it's something that we're trying to figure out how to grapple with through that process as well. But I will say, not quite the same thing, but we do have a measure in the CAP to expand or provide 100% renewable energy to residents and businesses. So at the very least, people who can't install solar can still benefit from accessing renewable energy sources. And then also with charging stations, we're looking at advancing CalGreen Tier 2 requirements, including for multifamily developments. So that would include implementing EV charging on site. So, but that would be for new development at this point. It's going to be a little bit harder to figure out how we provide access for existing development. But we are looking at ways in which we can really help bridge those equity gaps. I appreciate you pointing those out.
Yeah, and there's something else that I think I should bring up. We've been meeting for about 6 months since Dr. Wooten of the county health department gave us a presentation on heating emergencies. The county has a plan for using cooling centers in those situations. In 2021, there were 10 straight days of high heat days. What we found in searching for places to have more cooling centers here is that we don't have any county facilities that are open, or any facilities that are open that aren't already being used on Sundays. That's the problem day. So you can get cool on any day as long as it's not a Sunday. And in Fallbrook, for instance, we don't have, the only thing we have are grocery stores. And I mean, you can't exactly go to a grocery store for 6 hours. We don't have shopping centers, closed malls, where people used to be able to go hang out if they don't have air conditioning in their home. So So we came to the conclusion that all we can do is recommend to the county that they fund the opening of the county libraries in the rural areas on Sundays in emergency heating situations where we need cooling centers for people.
Yeah, thanks for that, Joy. Sorry, Megan, do you want to add something? I used to work in public health, so that's near and dear to my heart, and actually worked with some partners to develop a heat health curriculum to really provide education on what to do in event of being with someone who is having a heat-related event, you know, whether it's heat stroke, heat exhaustion, et cetera, and how to be adaptable in those situations. And of course, cooling centers come to the top. And we've heard from other communities like Spring Valley, who is also really interested in seeing expansion of those community resources on more days of the week. So I think the county is beginning to kind of recognize how important of a role we'll play in adaptation with all things as it relates to the climate. I mean, you can look at the recent flood and its impacts to see exactly that. So we'll continue to take that information and share it with others, especially in the public health department, in terms of like the importance of access to cooling centers whenever there are high heat days, regardless of what day of the week it might be.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lynn had a question. She just put it into the chat.
Yeah, I just saw that pop up. So Lynn is asking if we can speak to mass transit plans for the inland corridor nearer to the I-15 or even eastwards. I know there are other communities that are interested in transit opportunities in the unincorporated area. You may notice, you know, when you read through the CAP and the built environment and transportation measures, that the county doesn't have jurisdictional control over transit or the planning of transit, but we do have some tools we can use, and we do leverage those in the climate action plan. So, you know, the San Diego Regional Association of Governments, or SANDAG, has the regional transportation planning efforts under their purview. And then there are 2 transit agencies that operate in the county, MTS and North County Transit. So we do work with all 3 of those entities to see how and what the county can do to support, you know, transit that does exist on the fringes of the unincorporated area, and how we can make that better and more reliable for people to use that from within our communities. And then also looking to the future, what the county can do that's within our own jurisdictional control to, you know, expand transit into the unincorporated areas. So this is something that's a continuing conversation, especially with SANDAG, as we enter, you know, new planning cycles, looking at regional transportation planning and expanding mobility hubs into the unincorporated area to get at that mass transit. So it's something that we're, you know, constantly coordinating with those regional players on. And there are some measures within the CAP looking at how we can improve our roadways to streamline transit. We have a transit pass measure for residents that do have access to transit to provide free passes for those in the unincorporated area. And then the more forward-looking planning processes that we can do to you know, make it more attractive for the transit agencies to expand service into the unincorporated area. So there's more language on that within the CAP, but do want to recognize, you know, we are limited in that we don't operate transit, and it's out of our jurisdictional ability to be able to do everything we want in that area, but do look to those partnerships.
Thank you, Megan. Apologies for not being on camera. Do you have a sense of whether the CAP includes anticipated gains from those other agencies implementing mass transit plans?
I'm not sure I understand your question. What kind of gains?
Oh, benefits of carbon emission reduction.
Through our CAP?
Yeah, in the CAP from the transportation agencies implementing some mass transit. in the corridor?
Yeah, so, that would be something that would come up in future CAP updates, if we do see expanded access to transit and increased transit ridership from people that are coming to or from the unincorporated area, that is something the county could benefit from. So that's why we're doing what we can to influence that, to get more people from the unincorporated area into transit. Because that would be reflected in our transportation emissions in a future CAP update.
Okay, thank you.
But
Thanks.
do you have in your plan, excuse me, do you have in your plan an inventory of the gas emissions from transportation now? And then I think what Lynn was trying to get at, if you succeeded in getting more transit, what would that go down by? What would the gas emissions go down by, greenhouse gas emissions?
Yeah, so with the efforts we have currently in the CAP, because of the lack of, reliable transit infrastructure, you can see some pretty low vehicle miles traveled reductions in the current CAP, like 1.2% vehicle miles traveled reductions, which leads to less greenhouse gases from, the mix of fossil fuel powered vehicles that we see on the roadways. So that's purely a factor of the services that are available to residents in the unincorporated area. If there were more transit lines available in the future, then that potential for reducing, single occupancy vehicle trips would go up. And then that's something we could look at for, taking some credit for those reductions if the county was able to influence that increase in transit services to our areas.
Mike?
Yeah, I'm just reading Mike's.
Yeah, I would like to ask about people's not believing CARB when CARB says three things, not one. You can't solve this problem by doubling transit service. You have to double transit service. This is by 2030 with respect to 2018. By 2030, with respect to 2018, you have to double transit service. That's a big deal, but that does not work. You have to do three things: price road use, price parking. You have to do all three things. You have to do the pricing. If you don't do the pricing, the doubling of the transit will not work. You will not get the 25% reduction in vehicle miles traveled by 2030 with respect to 2018. That's an enormous reduction in vehicle miles traveled. And they know how you can get it, but you have to price parking. And so you have to realize that Ace Parking, Keith Jones, the executive director, he is a disruptor. And that's how you get rapid change, is in the private sector. I'm from the private sector myself.
We've heard this question.
Satellite systems.
Let's let them answer.
Were never anything that had ever been done before. I mean, you have to be disruptive and do something that hasn't been done before. So I wanted to ask you, have you talked to Keith Jones? That is something, if you took it seriously, you don't want to talk to bureaucrats, about change, because they actually don't want to change. They think it's not possible because it hasn't been done. And so that's just not working. But everybody here seems to think we need more transit, more transit, more transit. It does not work. CARB knows it doesn't work. That's why they put price parking, price road use, double transit.
Okay, Mike. Let's go to the answer.
Yeah, I'll just say, the county's CAP is focused on the unincorporated areas. County operations is an important part of that as well. But the fact of the matter is, without the lack of transit, you can't start charging folks to drive or to park
Absolutely
if they don't have alternative modes of
I can
transportation.
show you results.
Well, I agree with Tom that, or I agree with Megan. I mean, I know the people here in Fallbrook, and it wouldn't matter if you raised prices on parking in San Diego or wherever they have to go to work, they still have to go, and there's no bus to take them there. So having to pay more, all you're going to do is hurt them more, cause more suffering.
Yeah, thanks, Joy. And that's really what we've, been in conversations with other jurisdictions with similar, populations and land use patterns that we have been talking with CARB, fully recognizing that their plans are for a statewide approach, and that statewide approach isn't going to fit everywhere. And we do need to do the things that would enable folks to not choose to use their vehicles in the future first, to give those opportunities and then transition, to that transit or to active transportation opportunities. So I think you can see that laid out in the measures with focusing on those three things that Mike has brought up, but doing it in a way that, is keeping equity in mind and leaving opportunities for people to still carry out their lives and also allow the county to reduce greenhouse gases how we're able to through the CAP.
I have one other comment about transit on 76. We've actually lost transit lines on the 76, and that's because there was a bus that went from Temecula to Oceanside, and so it's not even under the jurisdiction of North County Transit. It's under Riverside County jurisdiction, but people lost that ability even to be able to get to Oceanside without driving. And so part of this needs to be done on a regional framework with Riverside County also.
Thanks for bringing that up.
I do want to highlight that the county has something which you're probably familiar with already, Joy, but the regional decarbonization framework. And the role of that is really to look for those opportunities that, don't necessarily fit into the more kind of refined scope of the CAP, and how the county can continue to be a leader and bring together partners in the private sector across jurisdictions and so on to achieve additional greenhouse gas emission reductions. And so we'll make sure to also bring that feedback to that team.
I was just going to comment. So we're out of questions. I don't see anything else. So I want to thank Meghan and Ariel for updating us on the draft CAP, and also all our viewers for coming and attending and asking great questions. So we'll see you next month, and have a good week.
Thank you
Thank you
very
so
much.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.